So we've gotten a basic introduction to the layout of Excel. So now let's take a look at how you actually start to enter data, text, formulas, etc. So suppose that as a teacher, I'm using Excel to keep track of my students. So let's say I have Joey, I have Babette, I have Chris, and I have Darlene. Let's say those are the only four students, and I have, let's say, test 1, test 2, test 3. So what I did was I just clicked into the cell, I just typed in the word I wanted to appear, and then I hit to go to the next cell to the right, I just hit the right arrow key, or I could hit the tab key. To go down a cell, I just use the arrow, or I could hit return. So I've created this little table here. And now let's say I have some numbers, and let's say these were the scores. So now I'm just typing in numbers here. And as you can see, whereas with text, Excel by default lined it up on the left, used left alignment. For numbers, it uses right alignment, which makes sense when you're summing up columns of numbers. So I add my values here. These are just arbitrary. And let's say, okay. So now I have my data here. And let's say what I wanted to do now was I wanted to find the total for each of these. So what I want Excel to do is I wanted to take the value in B2, the value in C2, and the value in D2, add them together, and put that value into cell E2. So here's how I enter a formula. I have to start a formula with the equal sign. And I tell Excel I wanted to take the value in B2. I want to add C2, and I want to add D2. And now you can see that Excel has highlighted the three cells, B2, C2, and D2. Now when I hit enter, it gives me the value. It took 76 and added it to 56 and 55 to get 187. And when I click in that cell, you can see that up here, it tells me that the active cell is E2. When I look in the worksheet, I see the value is 187, but when I look up here in this box, I can see the underlying formula. So what Excel does that makes all of this a lot easier is now let's say I click into this cell, so it's highlighted. You can see it's outlined with the blue box. I position the cursor over this little blue box in the lower right-hand corner of the cells that I selected, and I move it until I get a black cross instead of the white cross that I had previously. So I grab that little box there, the black cross, and I drag it down. And notice that Excel now populated these three cells with the sum of each of the other three rows. So if I click into cell E3, I can see that Excel knew that I did not want to add B2, C2, and D2. It just assumed I wanted to go to the next row and add B3, C3, D3. And then here it added B4, C4, D4, etc. And so now I can see that I have the totals here, and I didn't have to retype the formula. I just copied it down. That's what is called autofill, and Excel is very smart about a number of ways of filling cells, and we'll look at a couple more examples of that. So now let's say I wanted to know what's the average score for each of these tests. So what I could do now is I'm going to type in equals, and then I have a formula called average, a function. And what average asks for, it asks for the range of cells. So I'm going to tell it B2 colon B5. So now Excel understands that I want to take the values in cells B2 through B5 and average them, and that's what I get. Not surprisingly, when I click in here, and I grab this, I can copy it all the way across. And so now what I see is that my test average for test 1 was 82.75, 76.5 for test 2, test 3, 60.5. Overall, my averages for the students was total of 219.75, and I could do some more calculations to figure out put that average on a 0 to 100 scale so I have my grades for my students. Okay, let's look at a couple more examples of autofill. So as I said, Excel is very smart about doing this. Notice here that if let me move down, get out of the way a little bit, 1, 2, 3, and clearly there's a kind of pattern here. Well, when I select these three, Excel recognizes that the numbers are going up by 1 each time, and when I drag it down, it continues that pattern. Now obviously I would have had to have entered more than one number, otherwise Excel won't recognize the pattern. The only kind of pattern it recognizes like this with numbers is when the numbers are going up by the same amount each time. If you were multiplying by the same amount each time, Excel would not recognize that pattern. Here's another one that it's very good at. Type in January, and now when I click here and drag this down, Excel recognizes that I want to put the months of the year, and it goes all the way up through December, then starts again. Try another one, Sunday. Let's see what Excel does here. When I drag this down, Excel again recognizes a certain pattern, and it will autofill as far down as I want it to go. Okay, let's take a look at one more thing here. Now, suppose that I want to insert another student somewhere in the middle here. So what I can do is when I select this row and then I do either a right click or a command click, I can do insert, and Excel will insert a row, and notice that, let's say I have, we'll call this person Frank, and Frank didn't do so well, and Frank has these. So notice one thing here is that Excel automatically recognized that I want this average to go from B2 to B6. So it automatically updated these formulas here and recognized that I wanted to start at B2 and go all the way down to B6 or C6 or D6 in doing my averages. So Excel again is very smart about updating cell formulas. Here we had to copy it down, and so that's an easy enough adjustment. Now notice if I found out, oh, Joey pointed out that I misgraded his test and he actually ended up with an 88 here. When I change that value, this value here changes, the total for Joey, and this value here changes, which was the average for all the tests won, and meanwhile, of course, then this value also changes. So anything that depends on the value of B2 is going to change when I change the value of B2.